This is Todd from IT again. Today I'm going to give you an insight into another feature of Plantronics Manager Pro software. I'm going to talk about setting headset policy and compliance. Manager Pro allows me to effortlessly manage my headset state. I can set a firmware setting policy for each headset model and apply this to users or groups. So the next time one of my users plugs in their headset, it is automatically configured and in compliance. In the new Plantronics Manager Pro version 3.9, the software has changed from separate firmware and settings to a combined single policy format, just to simplify it. So here on the left-hand menu, if I click on Policy Firmware, it will now go and list every headset model that a user has plugged into their PC. So when a new model comes into an organization, the hub software will report that model up to Manager Pro into the tenant, and it will create a default policy automatically. So for every model, I can modify that default policy and define what firmware it uses and what settings I want to be applied to that headset. The policy I can then choose for all of my users or for a specific group. When Plantronics Hub next checks in, it will compare that headset settings and firmware that's on the device to this defined policy and implement any changes. I can monitor progress of this change by clicking on the compliance bar here. I can then see which users' devices are or are not compliant. Clicking on another level, it will then reveal if any are not in compliance, what's preventing the update. So let's go through and make a change on Blackwife 720 to the default policy. So I want to apply the latest version of firmware from Plantronics. And for this specific device, I want to actually turn the wireless Bluetooth off. So I've made the change to firmware and settings, and then I can save that to the default policy. If I then go in and check the compliance, so how many of my devices are actually matching my default policy, I can see there's a lot of green, but there's one that's not compliant. So if I click on that, it goes that level deeper, and I can find out why it's not in compliance. So I can see on the update status there's been no attempt to date. The issue is with the user Andy Brown. Now I know Andy Brown, we actually use him to check any new device that we bring into organization. So he's got about 4 or 5 devices that he's using. So I assume he just hasn't plugged in that Blackwife 720 yet, so it's not an issue. So a common use case for firmware settings and compliance is when you deploy a new firmware or software to the organization that you pre-test it with a control group, and that's what I use Andy Brown for. And that's really just check it with a few users before deploying it across the organization, and that really ensures you have a known good combination of headset settings and firmware before it's used. So that's all for now. I wanted to keep this short. My next video is going to look at the challenges an IT manager has of managing inventory of headsets across the organization. Thank you for listening.